Welcome back. I'm Alex Livingston. As we mark the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, a history center dedicated to telling the story of Black Wall Street and the Greenwood community is partially opening up today. Greenwood Rising will have 4 galleries sharing the history of Black Wall Street, starting with the rise of African Americans in Tulsa, the massacre, the efforts to rebuild Greenwood, and the journey to heal. Starting today, survivors and descendants will have access to the center along with their families. Then the center will open to Tulsa residents next week before closing again to finish construction. Therese Garnier spoke with curator Hannibal Johnson.
So Greenwood Rising is going to tell the entire story of the Greenwood district. Oftentimes people come here or they learn about the history and they only know about the massacre in 1921. But that's only a part of the story. The real story is much richer, and it really has to do with the indomitable human spirit. And so Greenwood Rising is an opportunity really to showcase the holistic portrait of the Greenwood district.
The massacre happened 100 years ago. Why do you think it took so long for like Greenwood Rising to come about? Is it because they were hiding a lot of things that were going on? And just kind of explain to me why it may have taken so long before we got something like this now.
Like most things, it's complicated. So Tulsa, when this happened in 1921, was on an upward trajectory. It was becoming the oil capital of the world. So the leaders of Tulsa, these are white men, wanted to position Tulsa as a cosmopolitan city. And it was being talked about all over the country and all over the world, again, becoming the oil capital of the world. So they had an interest in minimizing what happened in 1921. It was a stain on the community. Why would they want to talk about it? Other sectors of the white community felt shame that they had allowed this to happen in the community, and they wanted to just forget about it and move on. In the black community, there was post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and fear. In the black community, you had to think about, could this happen again? It's happened once, and it was devastating. Could it happen again? So there's fear, the anxiety. Talked to some of the survivors years ago, and they would say things like, well, it wasn't talked about in my family because the elders were really afraid that they would burden the kids in a way that would be debilitating and limiting on them if they talked about this horrible, horrible tragedy that occurred.
Now, there are some descendants who argue that some of the funds should be given to the descendants that's made, any profit that's made from this. What is your stance? Is there anything in the works to possibly, after the year passes, to give proceeds to the survivors and descendants?
That's a decision for the board of directors, not for me. But what I would say is Greenwood Rising was built with the generous contributions of philanthropists and other donors. We have a fiduciary responsibility as a recipient of those funds to use them for what they were intended, which is to build the facility. So we can't just divert those dollars to some other use because somebody says that that's what they think it ought to happen. The problem with that argument is, at least in my view, is that the whole concept of reparations is a broad concept. It's about making amends and repairing damage. It is a bundle of things. One of those things is paying cash payments to particular individuals. That's one of those things. Other things include things like educational initiatives, like changing curriculum, economic investments that might be targeted for the black community, the community that suffered most during the massacre. Investments in public spaces like Greenwood Rising or parks, John Hope Franklin Reconciliation Park. All those are forms of reparation. They're not competing, they're not mutually exclusive, and because someone focuses on one doesn't mean that they are against the other.
A lawyer for survivors and descendants of the Tulsa Race Massacre says the city spent $20 million to build Greenwood Rising, but did not include survivors and many descendants in the planning process. He wants the commission to do more when it comes to reparations.
Reparations at the root word is to repair, and you need to repair what was lost. And so a park in South Tulsa does not help survivors and descendants. A tree being planted doesn't help restore financial wealth and the wealth gap that was stolen. It doesn't bring back the hotel that was burned down. It doesn't create jobs like the jobs that was created in Greenwood. So none of that is reparations. You know, that's a farce, and it lets you know that the commission did not center the people, because the people have been crying out for 100 years for reparations, respect, and repair.
At least one survivor has issued a cease and desist letter telling the Centennial Commission to stop using her name and likeness to promote the center. All 3 survivors have sued the city of Tulsa, accusing it of appropriating the massacre for tourism and economic gain. The grand opening of Greenwood Rising is tentatively scheduled for July 3rd. Visits to the center will be free for the first year.